All right. Looks like people are starting to roll in. We're going to get started in just a moment here. Thank you all so much for being here tonight for this very important conversation.
Thank you.
All right. All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Heidi, and I'm the Community Outreach Coordinator at Politics and Prose. Thank you for joining IndiesUnite. We are a group of 6 independent bookstores located across the country in partnership with bookshop.org. IndiesUnite is a collaborative project offering a series of virtual events for students, parents, and educators that challenge the status quo, question our current standards, and leave no curiosity left unexplored. This evening, we are joined by authors John Della Volpe, Nichols, Barbara DiLorenzo, and co-founder of the grassroots movement Teachers Unify to End Gun Violence, Abbey Clements. We are looking forward to hearing their insights into our topic, taking action to prevent gun violence. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. We will drop the book purchase link for the author's books related to this conversation into the chat. Please order from one of your preferred independent bookstores listed in the link by clicking on the bookstore logo found at the bottom of the IndiesUnite homepage. Or you can order the books from your favorite local independent bookstore. We thank you either way. At the end of the presentation, we'll get to audience questions and answer as many as possible. You can ask a question by clicking on the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen and enter your question there. You can also upvote a question you like and want most answered. We do ask that everyone be respectful, one another, in any questions and comments. Before our panel discussion, please let me introduce our guest this evening. John Della Volpe is the director of polling at the Harvard Kennedy School Institute of Politics, where he has led the Institute's polling initiatives on understanding American youth since 2000. The Washington Post referred to John as one of the world's leading authorities on global sentiment, opinion, and influence, especially among millennials and in the age of digital and social media. He is the author of Fight: How Gen Z is Channeling Their Fear and Passion to Save America. Nichols is an arts-based organizer, social impact designer, social entrepreneur, and keynote lecturer. She's mobilized change makers nationwide to develop creative approaches to the social, civic, and racial justice issues that matter most within communities. He has been deemed a National Ideas That Matter recipient, a 2-time Clinton Global Initiative innovator, and a St. Louis visionary for her community impact. She's both a 2020 Monument Lab Fellow and a LEAP Fellow of the Harvard University Graduate School of Design. She's the author of The Art of Protest: Creating, Discovering, and Activating Art for Your Revolution. Barbara DiLorenzo's first picture book was Renato and the Lion, which received a starred review from Booklist and was named a Bank Street Best Book of the Year, a Junior Library Guild selection, and a CBC Notable Social Studies Trade Book for Young People. Her picture book, One Thursday Afternoon, sheds light on how an unpredictable world can make a child feel, reminding us that big fears can become smaller when we take time to look, listen, and create. Abbey Clements is the co-founder of Teachers Unify to End Gun Violence and president of the board of directors. She is a survivor teacher of the Sandy Hook school tragedy in 2012 and has been an elementary educator for 30 years. Clements has been a gun violence prevention activist, a Moms Demand Action volunteer, hunter leader, and a strategic consultant on gun violence issues for the AFT. She has been featured in various documentaries and publications, including Newtown, If I Don't Make It, I Love You, and Bullets into Bells. Thank you all so much for being here this evening. We're going to start out with some individual questions and then open it up for a larger discussion among our panelists before taking some questions from the audience. So we have a lot to talk about, so let's just jump in. Tonight, we are focusing on taking action to prevent gun violence, and I'd like to start with some discussion of the generation that has been most acutely impacted, Gen Z. So John, you have spent years studying millennials and Gen Z. What do we need to know about them, and how are they different from previous generations?
Thank you, Heidi, and it's really an honor to be part of this very special panel. Abby, thank you for all of your work over the years. I think a couple of things just to start off about Gen Z. As you mentioned, Heidi, at the beginning, for the better part of 22 years now, my job has been to study young Americans, their attitudes towards service, community service, volunteerism, and politics. And that means two things. During the semesters, I work with undergraduates to conduct these very large academic like surveys to to see their interest in voting, those sorts of things. But every summer, when the school year is over, I travel across the country. And in 2017, I just could feel an immediate difference. It happened to be essentially kind of the first cohort of Gen Z or Zoomers that I talked to. And the answers to the questions I've been asking for the previous 15, 17 years were just different. The room was heavy. I would ask, what connects us as Americans? What connects you as young people? And just a couple of years previous, I hear opportunity. Even in some of the most challenged circumstances, I hear opportunity. But then I heard fear. Fear for ourselves, fear for our future, our health, etc. This is in 2017. Okay. And then I heard about like the growing up in the shadow of the recession. This Generation Z, right? They're born between the late 1990s and through 2010. It's the most diverse, most educated generation, young teenagers through folks in their 20s. I then begin to pay attention as they talked about the fear and then the anxiety that they had. And that was, again, before Charlottesville, before Las Vegas, and before Parkland, right? I then continued to look at this, spent a lot of time with the Parkland survivors, and began to fully appreciate that rather than kind of fleeing, rather than turning away from this fear, and it wasn't just a fear of not knowing, right, what's going to happen, where the doors were, where the windows are, where the escape points were, right, but fear of so many other things related to opioids, sexual assault, et cetera, et cetera. But again, rather than fleeing from that, what I began to see was like this incredible resilience. And from a political perspective, those young people from Parkland were really able to kind of channel all this passion, all this energy, and challenge the rest of us to go out and do something about that. That's when I took a particular interest in following and measuring where they would show up. Voter registration would increase, elections would change, and ultimately it led to 2 cycles of the most prolific participation in politics we've ever seen, right? That's the lesson of Gen Z. We could talk a lot about some of these other circumstances, but channeling this fear into something very, very positive is really what sets this generation apart, I think, from every generation, at least in the last 70 years. No generation has dealt with more trauma more quickly in their young lives without ever seeing America at our best than this generation. So yeah, that's a very, very quick synopsis of what I've learned over the last several years.
And the other thing that I took from your book is that they're highly empathetic people as well, which is amazing to me.
And especially when you ask, like just by definition, our youngest citizens are the most vulnerable, oftentimes among the most vulnerable within a certain population, right? But when I ask them why they do what they do, why they vote, why they protest, why they engage, it's often not just about themselves. It's more often than not, it's about those other people who don't have those rights. And the sad thing, Heidi, that we've really tried to focus the last couple of semester projects is the degree to which young people feel under attack in this country. We just released our 44th poll the other day, last Thursday. 79% of young Americans, most of which are Gen Z, say that other people in this country are under attack. 59%, almost 3 in 5, say they are under attack. No one more than members of the LGBTQ community. Second, which are young women. And that's why I think we've seen consistent participation when millennials turn to Gen Z, and then I think we'll see that again next week. Just the last thing I'll say real quick is that when my generation, Gen X, when my parents' generation, baby boomers, and when my older kids' generation, millennials, when they were younger, when they could vote, they voted at half the level as Gen Z or Zoomers, right? So this is something that you can measure, and I just think it's extraordinary, and that's why I'm so hopeful.
Yeah, thank you, John. Dee, just kind of talking about some of the things that John touched on, like the activism and showing up and speaking out for people. You've been involved in activism around art for a long time. So how do you see the impact of art affecting change and giving kids, especially Gen Z, a voice?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And one thing that I would add on to John's points before I answer is that as a, I lead product inclusion, racial justice, and equity research at YouTube. And one of the things that we are learning most about Gen Z, way more than like my generation of millennials, is just how much of their lives are digital, and how much of how they express themselves, how they navigate the world, understand the world, is all through mobile technology. And I think when it comes to the arts, there's a more expansive journey that I'm on these days in terms of looking at creators, like the spirit of creativity in this digital sense. And I would say that, with starting my life as an organizer around school issues and bullying, and transitioning to college to think about like the Gen 6 issues and Hurricane Katrina and stuff, to grad school and the immediate post-grad life of 2014 of organizing in the uprising in Ferguson, Missouri, following the murder, the shooting, the death of young Mike Brown by the hands of former officer Darren Wilson. The arts have been center and core to all of it. And what I think the power of it is that for those who perhaps don't have the vocabulary, don't have the training, haven't necessarily had the support to get involved in social issues, the arts become a lens and an avenue for being able to articulate those things that are not often said or expressed easily through words. And with harnessing that truth, harnessing that power of the arts, I think that has been key to my life and key to how I organize with other young people. But as I explained in my book, there's a rich history to this. When you think about different social movements throughout history and across cultures, the arts are always there. The visual arts, fashion, music, performance, all of these art forms are constant. And so if we ignore the influence of creative expression in our social movements, we miss a big part of what's driving not just our politics forward, but our culture at large. And so I think that has been key. And with looking at internet culture right now, YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, especially Snapchat as well, young people are doing that in even more creative ways. It's not just making a poster, drawing images, lifting up their voices, but there's the viral nature of what they can create. And so people are going bigger and even more interactive with how they engage, so that more people are aware. And I think we're seeing that. We started to see that in 2014 with the uprising in Ferguson. We saw it with Black Lives Matter after the murder of Trayvon Martin, but even more so in the summer of 2020, we really saw that explosion of just how global these social movements can expand. And at least from a Black cultural perspective, that was really true. But across LGBTQ plus rights, accessibility and disability rights, trans rights, like the whole gamut. I think we're seeing young people in particular get even more creative with what they can do through the arts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you're talking about all the digital pieces, but in your book, you also talk about just even you talk about using Post-it notes and being inspired, like writing things to yourself, and like, doing you talked about when you were younger, just doing like a little sheet of paper and writing things on it. And you're just kind of using what it's at your hands. So
yeah, that is
yes,
so
having
accessible.
yeah.
You don't have to have fancy equipment to make something. Many of the tools that you might need, if you really explore and experiment with your own creativity, there's so much that you can do and create right in wherever you are. And that's part of the power of it too.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'm going to show this piece from your book, and it's the Parkland piece.
Yeah,
People to see,
and it's all
really,
assemblage.
yes. I mean, that's so powerful.
looking at even on the left side of that spread, the building
Yeah.
blocks
Yeah,
that start to
absolutely.
spell out
Yeah.
things, and how it speaks to young people, the visual
Mhm.
nature of young people's lives.
Yes.
Just a week and a half ago, there was a school shooting in St. Louis at one of the schools that I used to visit when I was a museum educator there. And there was a local leader who called me up and said, "Hey, I need help helping the community um, have a collective moment of mourning and expression
Mm.
about what's happening, so that everyone can feel empowered to do something, to activate themselves, so that this doesn't happen again."
Yeah.
And part of what they started to do was assemble things from across the school, the desks, as a canvas to allow people to create their own ofrendas or memorials, thinking about bulletin boards and how expressive those become in the classroom, and the ways in which you can pull the whole community into this practice of just using what's around you.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's such a great segue into what Barbara is doing with her book, because she's written this wonderful book about what has happened with a little girl after a drill. So Barbara, your picture book provides this way to support younger kids emotionally. So can you talk a little bit about what you've done with kids to support them in the community around this issue of gun violence? Maybe talk
Sure,
about your book a little bit. Yeah. Thank
Sure,
you.
absolutely. I just want to say, Dee, I love hearing what you were saying. And my sort of personal motto, I teach art for all ages, really, is everyone is entitled to a creative life. And I love how you're talking about, just any materials, any resources at hand, go for it. I love that. Absolutely. I'd love to talk to you after, see if we can coordinate.
Making connections.
Yeah, that's great. So, in the question of, how to support young people in this atmosphere, I have to say I didn't come into this space willingly. I was at an author visit and there was an active shooter lockdown, and I was stuck there with a librarian for about 45 minutes, a couple parents, and it was after giving 2 assemblies where the little kids were adorable but wiggly, and all I could think about for that 45 minutes was, how are the kids, how are they experiencing this, how are the teachers keeping the kids calm and okay? And I was so overwhelmed. And actually that was the second brush with gun violence I had that year, and I was not prepared for any of it. After that day, we ended up being okay. It was actually a threat that had been called into the school, but we didn't know that for that 45 minutes. We thought there was someone on the other side of the door. And so I love to write and illustrate picture books. I did not have any intention of focusing on this topic, but it haunted me. And I kept coming back to it, and I kept thinking, we have books for older kids, and we have picture books for kids that are facing a bully or a first day of school or a new sibling, all these challenges. But the elephant in the room is this huge thing, and we don't know how to talk about it. I have a child who's 20 and a child who's 5. And the 20-year-old, actually, that day that I was involved in that lockdown, when I realized it was a threat to the area schools, I texted him to say, "Are you okay?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm fine. I'm in a lockdown. It's no big deal." And meanwhile, I was shaking and even crying later. So, I think some kids have learned to compartmentalize this stress, and some kids are understandably not able to really juggle it. So I spent about a year thinking, how can I support kids? How can I provide something that will be a tool? And I realized I have no answers. I really have no answers to offer. I don't even understand how we're here. But one thing I kept reflecting on was how nature and creativity and conversation, those 3 elements, kept kind of coming into focus. And so I created this book about a lockdown drill because I didn't want to make it about an actual event. It takes place after the grandfather takes the granddaughter to a park, and they have a picnic, and then they paint together. But she's very upset, and he makes space for those upset feelings. And so within that book, they have a conversation. She does explain what's going on in her mind, and he does offer support. And then in the end, she does say, actually, even though you think you understand, you haven't gone through this. And he gives her a hug and says, you're right, I'm here to listen. And I feel like that's the message that I want for adults, actually, more than anything, is I want adults to listen to the kids and hear how things are different. And I don't know how people are using this book, but I ended up having to explain it to my own 5-year-old when she heard me talking about it. And I was like, I'm not prepared even to talk to her at 5. So it's challenging and it's hard. But this fall, to support the book, I've been going to different parks and I've been passing out art materials and just inviting kids and caregivers to just make art, go wander around the park. And then I have a little sign about the book. And if they ask about it, I talk about it, but I don't want to trigger anybody. And I just want to de-stress the kids, the parents, and me. So that's what I've been doing.
That's fabulous. And I think, something again that John brings up in his book, and he talks about kids want to have these conversations, like Gen Z and younger, they want to have these hard conversations. And I mean, as a parent myself, trying to write the language, finding the right tools, finding the right support is so important. And that's why I'm so happy we're having this conversation tonight. Abbey, it's been about a year since the founding of Teachers Unify to End Gun Violence. I would love for you to tell us how this organization came together, and what do you want people to know most about your group?
Well, gosh, it's such an honor to be here with you all. Hearing you talk about this quandary that we're in, we don't have the vocabulary for a country that allows gun violence to be the leading cause of death for children. And no one knows what to do with that. And then there's the normalizing of it. And then we have this wave of insane propaganda coming at us from all sides, from it seems like every social media outlet, on how to counter it with this insane warlike effort. And so I think the arts and conversation those two things are exactly what we need to do. And really that's what brought Teachers Unify to End Gun Violence together. The cycle of hearing about school shootings, it's just, if you even hear about it, the one in St. Louis took a little while last week, and it was just infuriating. But it was the Oxford shooting that happened almost a year ago now in Michigan. And, here we were again, people killed in the school, teachers shot, people injured, this horrible tragedy unfolding, and there's misinformation and no one really knows the story. And I was texting with 2 of my teacher friends who, among us, we have over 70 years teaching experience, and one of whom is a survivor of the Parkland tragedy and still teaches there, and the other teaches in high school in New York City, and she deals with her students who confront community gun violence every day, and it's just like part of their DNA. It's so wrong. And we were just texting back and forth how we never hear from the teachers. And those are the stories that we need to hear about. And we were just, there are stories in every classroom across every community about gun violence, not just school shootings. There are very few of those, thank God. I mean, it's still too many, but it's every day. It's domestic violence, it's suicide by gun, it's threats, it's being afraid of your neighborhood, hearing gunshots at night. There are kids who go to sleep every single night. So these are the stories that we want to elevate. And I just said, do you want to start a national organization for teachers, by teachers, educators, and school staff? And they said yes, without skipping a beat. And we all still teach. And we just feel like it's the narrative, it's the conversation where you can protect the confidentiality of kids and families, but we need to tell these stories and we need to hear them from the people who are on the front lines. And I'm so inspired by Gen Z. I mean, I've watched, my daughter who was in lockdown in physics class and who didn't know for a short period of time how I was. I've watched her as a 16-year-old become an activist and an organizer, didn't even know how she was changing so fast. And now, you know, the next generation is carrying the baton, and I am incredibly inspired by them. And I just think there are so many ways we can work together. And I think it's through the arts. We were laughing on this part. We were invited, Teachers Unified and Gun Violence. I laughed because we were invited by Voters for Tomorrow, an incredible organization of young people, some of whom were 13 at this conference in Philly, confident, smart, savvy, calling legislative offices, asking which Taylor Swift song was their favorite, and based on that, they could tell like how they were with things. I mean, and I thought, oh my gosh, we're going to be the oldest people there unless like a Nana comes and drops somebody off. And it didn't even matter. That was true, but it did not even matter. They wanted to hear from us. They came up to us after we spoke, you know, moved by our personal stories, but also because of our organization, because they're watching us. We've left this on their lap, and they want to know what we're going to do about it. And I think it's all about following their lead, collaborating with them, and using the arts and the ways to have conversations where it's very confusing to have the conversations.
Yeah, we have so much to learn from them. John and Barbara, both of you talk about the importance of listening to young people on your platform. So can you maybe expand on that as it relates to taking action to prevent gun violence? And John, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. So I think a couple of things. One is, you know, I spend a lot of time with young people through lots of different research methods. And one of the questions I ask them is, what don't we understand, you know, about you? And then I also ask a lot of questions in terms of how well they think other members of their community are listening and kind of understand where they're coming from. And they give pretty good quote grades to their close friends, to teachers for making an effort, you know, as well as their parents. But like the rest of us, they feel like there is, and I think they're correct on this, like this complete disconnect. Okay. And I think like so many others on this call kind of wasn't looking for this, wasn't expecting it, but I couldn't run from it when I wouldn't go into a room, and I'd be focused on, okay, I'm gonna conduct a focus group, you know, on climate policy or education or about politics. But before I would start, I'd say, how's it going, everybody? You know, what's a good day? You know, and I would begin to hear, you know, some really serious talk, right? When I don't need to go to, you know, visit my best friend who's in a coma because of an opioid situation, right? Or the suicide, or, you know, so many of these other issues. And what I found is that it doesn't take a lot, right? It just takes someone to put a group of people together in a room, oftentimes like the larger, the better, actually, you know, and just listening for that. What's a good day? What's a bad day? What keeps you up at night? And then it just completely kind of pours out, right? And I'll never forget, it was one of the inspirations for this book, summer of 2018. I asked the question, what don't we understand? And a young college student says, what the older generation doesn't understand is the way in which you think about your taxes, right? That's the way we think about living and dying every time we walk into a classroom, right? This is the weight that they're carrying. People can laugh it off. They can say, gee, we had it different. But as we know, you know, from our collective experiences, as we know from the data, which shows consistently before and after COVID, 52% of young Americans under 30, it's higher among teenagers, say that more days than not, the last 2 weeks, they've had significant feelings of hopelessness and depression. 25% say that is so bad, they think about more times than not the last 2 weeks, self-harm. 5% have those feelings every single day, which means that whichever school you're in, middle school, high school, community college, you're dealing with a handful to a dozen plus of young people who are walking the hallways thinking about these sorts of things, right? We don't collectively, I think there's more recognition today than there was a couple of years ago, right? But we collectively don't understand those things. And oftentimes, whether it's a parent, it could be a coach, it could be anyone who can make that difference. So that's the message, that I've been, fortunate to be able to have a little bit of a platform to kind of spread. We just have to have that conversation. What's a good day? What's a bad day? What can we collectively do, right, to help you to overcome some of these challenges? So thanks for that opportunity, Heidi.
Yeah, thank you. Barbara?
Yeah, I love hearing all the statistics that you were mentioning, John. I don't have that, but I just remember being a child, kind of in a hard situation, tough family life, and there were some adults in my life that really listened to me, and it made a very big difference. And speaking to your point, John, it gave me hope. It made me feel like I just had to survive this chapter, and then I could, have a better tomorrow. And so I do try to be that person for other young people. There's a class I teach once a week over at the Arts Council of Princeton. We bring in about 25 kids ages 5 to 18 from it's an organization that helps families facing homelessness. It's called Homefront. And we feed them and we give them a studio art lesson, or sometimes Princeton University does a performing arts lesson with them. And I teach that class very differently. Sometimes when it's my turn to do a studio art lesson, I just kind of put out the materials and I ask them what they want to do. And I kind of see where they lead. It's amazing the different topics they want to talk about. I found this population, I don't know why, but for some reason, there's a very large population of LGBTQ youth. And so having the freedom in that space to draw the flags they want to draw and talk about the things they want to talk about, in a safe space, creating that safe space for them to express themselves. I think just instinctually, I feel like that is a good thing. I don't know how that would directly reduce gun violence, but I think just, again, instinctually, if more of us listen to each other, maybe it would be a better world.
Oh, thank you, Barbara. For Dee and Abby, both of you are artivists and you're educators. So how do you think we can help the younger generation, teachers and parents, use art to channel this energy that they're feeling, these emotions and feelings they're having? How can they channel it for this movement? Dee, do you want to start off?
Yeah, I have two responses. One that relates to your previous question on listening. One of my biggest heroes of these recent years is Brian Stevenson. And for the sake of storytelling, but he often evangelizes about the power of getting proximate. And when it comes to listening, I think one of the things that has been really critical to me is to be in the culture of like where young people are, what they listen to, what they engage, to understand the contextual nature of like what's out there. And I think in its relationship to art, I'm often inspired by like lyricism within music, especially hip hop and pop culture. I mean, pop music in particular. And mental health is a huge issue with young people, as Barbara and John were just expressing. And I think about how, this week on November 1st, a lot of people woke up to the news about this young hip hop artist, Takeoff from the Migos, being murdered, being shot at a like birthday party. And I wonder the extent to which elders, teachers, family members have heard that news and talked to their young people, because there are probably some young people who were listening to their music and feeling a sense of hope, feeling a sense of optimism about life, and to lose someone. I know I had to call my younger brother who's 18, and I think there's a lot of power in digital art, virtual art, the online culture of things, that we can start to lean into a little bit more because of that. So that was one answer to your question. Because you mentioned Sticky Note to Self project earlier, that I ran as I was organizing in Ferguson, part of that, the power of that tiny 3x3, canvas for me was mental health. That with opening my horizons and attention, and capacity to engage more in activism, I found myself feeling threatened, feeling paranoid, uh, feeling depressed a lot, and anxious. And that 3x3 note that I would write to myself and publish on Instagram each day was an outlet. It was an ability for me to talk to myself when no one else was willing to listen, because they were going through the same thing. Like everyone in the city was going through the same thing. And so I think, as a writer, that art form is something that I wish more young people would embrace and engage with those around them, because it's a really powerful tool to just write it out.
Yeah, the power of storytelling, even if it's just on a sticky note.
Just the 3x3 doesn't have to be much.
Yeah. Thank you, Dee. Abby?
In thinking about this question, it brought me back to after the tragedy, when I was with these students who went through the most horrific experience, I mean, who survived but lost their friends and neighbors. And you're in a classroom all day. This is what we don't talk about, like what the aftermath is like. I mean, I keep thinking, sidebar, about the folks in St. Louis, and of course there's no discussion about knocking down that building. They're not getting federal money for that. And those teachers and students have to decide, how they can be in that space. So we were in an alternate location. Luckily, there happened to be an empty school nearby in the meantime. And you're just supposed to go about your day. You're supposed to get back to your routines, because that's what kids need. And all the time aware that this was such an important time, and that our role was so heavy and intense, and I think could really be informative to how things were going to go for them. And we got very little guidance there, but I had the wherewithal to just create space for them to draw and to write. And my friend gave us brand new notebooks. I gave them out to the kids and I said, you can write about anything you want. You can write about what happened to us, which is what I'm going to do, or you can write about anything you want. You can write about the holidays coming up, dreams that you had, whatever, because some kids didn't want to face it or couldn't. They were so little, second graders. And I sat and I used that time for me to write down and to draw which door I thought I went out of, because I was afraid I was going to forget. The mind just is an incredible thing and wants to protect you and all things. But for years after, I'm thinking about the following year too, those children were directly impacted. They were the first graders who ran out of the building, and some of whom survived. Some of them saw 6 kids murdered in front of them and their teacher. And here we were faced again. And art was such an important part of my day. They were not available for learning addition and subtraction. They barely could stay awake. They weren't sleeping in their bed even a year later. And the town, and I think if there's anything that we learned, it's so little, because I see the aftermath plans over and over, and I think, oh my God, how can we have not learned anything all these years later? Yeah. But we've seen one thing is like places for people to go and just do art and bring kids who, if you don't know how to talk about it with your kids, or they're not speaking. Like my son was 11 and he was just like, I don't know. It was a place to just draw, relax, lay down, play a little basketball, or, draw. So I just think that we really even haven't tapped into to how important that is to give kids and adults probably space to work through what the trauma that they've gone through. So I know the power of literature, and plus what is there, I keep going back to that, like, what is there to say? They would come in and say to me, what if this happens to my kid when they go to school? You can't say it's not going to happen again, you know, or I miss Miss Soto, you know, my teacher from last year. I miss Miss Soto every day. So finding ways for them to express themselves, we had like a little wish jar or something I could just put notes in. I didn't know what to do, but I wish we would compile some of that, right? So that people know, like, teachers know what to do with that. That's an idea someday. But there's an incredible power in the arts that can grapple with the things that we just don't know how to address directly.
Yeah, absolutely. I know what I'm hearing from all of you is that the power of words, the power of art, the power of making space and listening just can't be underestimated. It can't be overestimated, underestimated. So I think that is an incredibly powerful lesson to remember. Before we jump into questions, I do want to ask each of you this question because, you know, next week, the midterm elections, and we continue to hear about school shootings in the news. And I just want to hear from all of you, you know, what is your hope for the outcome of this election as it relates to preventing gun violence? You know, but just what are your thoughts on that? John, do you want to start?
Sure. It's my favorite topic. I think a couple of observations, one of which is, as I said, relative to the last 40 years, this generation of young people, double participation in the midterm elections, and without young people under 30s increasing the level of participation, highest ever in 2020, as well as their support for President Biden in Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, those 5 states, Biden doesn't win. Biden doesn't win. Same thing happened in Georgia with the runoffs, okay? Young people don't deliver us collectively, like the first, not enough, okay, but the first significant progress on gun violence from Washington, D.C. in a couple of generations, right? That doesn't happen without the resilience and the character of the young people that we've been talking about, right? And that's an important message for them. You know, they still get so frustrated, but they need to see that progress can happen so they can stay, quote, in this fight, right? So that, I think, series of events, not just on gun violence, but on climate action, on student loan and other things, I think, along with the specter of the negative around rights, losing rights, around Dobbs and other things, I think is enough that we'll see significant turnout again. What I've been thinking about the last week is, as a pollster, I look at a lot of polls. I'm not seeing the data that indicates there's a red wave or a blue wave, but what I am pretty confident in is that we'll see a Gen Z wave. There's no reason to believe that the level of participation that we've seen the last 2 cycles will dissipate. And I think it's going to surprise a lot of people in the degree to which Democrats have a chance at the Senate. It's because I don't want to put too much more pressure on them, right? Because they just have to live their lives, right? And they're doing an incredible job. But the degree to which Democrats are competitive, Democrats are losing voters over the age of 45 in almost every state. It's the combination of millennials and Gen Z that is making this. And I'm also expecting, hopeful that the administration and hopefully the Democratic Senate will hear this message as well.
Right. Thank you, John. Barbara?
I think it's great that people are coming out to vote more and more, but it has never been more important. I mean, there's so much on the line, and there is so much that matters in how we elect our leaders and what they're going to stand for. I mean, even logging on right before this, I saw something about in New Jersey, synagogues were all under a threat right now. And I see a lot of anti-Semitism, a lot of issues. We need good people. So I hope people vote with their heart and just really put some solid people in place.
Thank you. Dee, how about you?
Yeah, I feel like there are 3 things that I would love for families, young people at large to take into consideration. One is that yes, this is a critical, like the midterms are critical, is a critical moment, but even more importantly are those down ballot measures, those local issues that affect your state even more so than in some cases than who your congressperson or senator is. And so taking the momentum from this moment when you go out to vote to keep voting in all the local elections that are coming up as we turn into the new year. I think the second thing that's top of mind for me is combating disinformation. I think each generation has experienced this in different ways. For a lot of us, it was seeing campaigns on TV or hearing radio ads. But I think it's more it's evil how it manifests in some of our social media platforms. And so the ways in which teachers, community members, et cetera, can help any and everyone be able to distinguish between disinformation campaigns and the things that really align with their values. I think that is really critical. And then the third is navigating and having resilience in voters' sovereignty versus voter suppression. And knowing that once we get to the polls in many areas, especially rural areas, people will find any and every reason to try to dissuade you from voting, especially as young people who are perhaps out there for the first time. And someone might say, oh, your license doesn't match your XYZ, your voter registration. And being able to know that there are measures to get around that and still be able to enact your vote. And so I think that like there's some tactical things that I would love for all of us to keep in mind, but especially our younger voters, so that this experience is one that keeps them fired up for all that's to come.
Yeah, being informed is key for sure. Thank you, Dee. And finally, Abby, I know on your website you all have the gun sense candidates that people can take a look at. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, if what people say, nothing's changed in the almost 10 years since the tragedy of Sandy Hook, but one thing that has changed is that every candidate out there has to be clear about where they stand with guns. And so, I mean, years ago, you would have to dig for it. I mean, even when we had President Obama was afraid to talk about guns until he had to, and he kept having to. But now you know. And so gun safety is on the ballot. And this is how you live. Like you were saying, this is every day. This is how your school board is going to make sure safety protocols are handled. Do we want to have active shooter drills that are simulating death and trauma through the hallways, people dressed up and screaming with fake blood? Or are we going to talk about best practices and care about how kids are moving through these drills so that Barbara doesn't have to write the next book on the trauma that we're putting kids through, because we can't fix this problem of gun violence. So I can't think of a more important election than this one. And I just keep saying over and over that gun safety is on the ballot. It's too difficult to register to vote in some states. It's unbelievably difficult. But I will continue to text my friends and family members, and even if we don't have the same thoughts, gun safety is on the ballot. That's what I just keep saying. I don't know how anybody can vote for somebody who values guns and the gun lobby over lives and the lives of children and their families.
Thank you so much for that, Abby. Now I would like to turn to audience questions. I see we have at least one in here. I'd love for people to add some more. We have a fantastic panel here who just a wealth of information. So please feel free to jump on. So let's get to our first question. This is from Jean-Paul Justin Aumann. Since the human brain does not differentiate between an image and a real experience, how do you account for gun violence as entertainment? Movies, video games, etc., as normalizing of gun violence as a response to personal conflict, And in the real world, people die and there's nothing entertaining about that. It is about it that no one wants to pass legislation to stop. So I'm not sure who wants to take that one first.
Well, I can offer something.
Okay. And then D, Barbara, then D.
So prior to 2018, I watched lots of movies. I'm not a big gamer, but I've, been exposed to imagery along those lines plenty of times. After 2018, every time I heard a loud noise, I would jump as if it was a gunshot. And I never actually heard a gunshot in the 2 events that I was a part of. So something was different. I don't know what, because I did see all the images in the movies, but somehow my brain knew that's separate. But what I went through scared me so much that now I imagine every loud noise as a gunshot.
D, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I think part of the desensitization of it all is that gun violence is, centered in American culture. It has been. It's not necessarily a generational thing. The boomers who are still watching cowboy and Indian movies and Turner Classic Movies to, the Gen Xers who are watching like RoboCop, to my generation that played a lot of video games and witnessed a lot of, guns and stuff within music, to the ways in which Gen Z now experiences it on, across social media and platforms. I think part of it is that when we consume this stuff so much and it becomes so so synonymous with everyday life, to the point where we don't blink an eye when someone's shooting someone in a movie or in a game. In those games, people come back to life. I think in the real world, we forget that the entertainment allows that sense of rebirth, of coming back again. And when so many people that we witness, when art becomes real or life imitates art, and we don't get those folks back. In the case of this week, like I really feel so disturbed by the murder of this hip hop artist. We don't get that person back, and these are things that like our youngest people are now facing with, because this type of thing within music culture, within hip hop culture, within American culture, it's so repetitive. Every other week, we are hearing about another school shooting. Every other week, we're hearing about a mass shooting. Every other week, we're hearing about hip hop artists, music artists being murdered and dying. And I think over time, I think people resort to that because that's all we see. That's what's being elevated. And so I think we have to find the power within ourselves to stop it, to stop watching those movies, to shift in some other way, to elevate other forms of connection, of relating to each other and being with each other, and of holding hard emotions without escalating them towards violence. And that takes a lot of unlearning of what it is to be American, because out of all the nations, we're the ones dealing with this so frequently, so deeply. So something has to shift.
Okay. Thank you, Dee. Thank you for bringing all the important information up. Abby or John, do you have any response, or do you want to go into the next question?
I think so many points that you brought up, all of you, on this is so important. And when we talk about, this conversation sometimes gets brought back to, and it makes sense to the violence in movies and video games that people are exposed to. What's concerning, like you mentioned, that every culture has movies and video games like this, but we're the only ones who have easy access to firearms and deadly ammunition. So, and what concerns me, especially now, as COVID has gone on for so long and the effects on children we know have been so great, that it's the isolation. So add in easy access to firearms, add in isolation, that missed social experience that they haven't had in three. I had a parent email me today saying that this is going to be the first birthday party that this fourth grader is going to have had. So, you know, if you add in all those things, it's not just the violence, although let's move away, right? And also what bothers me too about that is that, like, it's not just coming back to life, but the fluidity and the ease of, like, the good guy coming in and swooping in and saving the day from behind the couch in slow motion. And that we don't realize the chaos and the trauma that's involved in these experiences. I mean, Barbara, what you've experienced, and it doesn't matter if you were afraid, that if you thought it was real at the time, that is like grooves on your brain have eternally changed the dynamic of your brain and how you think. And that's probably has something to do with why you jump at the gunshots. And it's confusing to people. We don't talk about it enough. So I do think that exposure to video games, right, for endless hours is not great for any kid, but especially in America.
If I could just add one other thing to Abby's list of the isolation and the desensitization is the depression, right? Is now you have millions of young people looking for a place to feel good about themselves. And I think that we're seeing, sadly, you know, when we talk about finding these areas of support, which can lead to some pretty dark and extremely dangerous places. And that's a lot of the backlash, I think, that we're seeing on the other side of the resilience coin.
Yeah. So, you know, we're running out of time, and there are a lot of really great comments and some other questions that we're just not going to have a chance to get to. This is such an important topic, and we could spend a long time talking about this tonight, but I do want to, you know, end on a question that I think will bring it around to everything we're talking about tonight. Kirsten Pickle writes, has there been research on what protective factors we could give our kids to help them cope with gun violence in our culture? I know some children have a more personal experience with it, but they all experience it on some level. So maybe we could end with this question, like what we've talked about a lot of really great tools tonight, but what would be your parting message on, you know, how we can help our kids with this topic? Would like to start.
If you know, appreciating the fact that I ask questions for a living. I have no mental health, you know, or psychology background, but I do think that because of the toxic nature of our divides and the cultural wars, that a lot of educators turn away from having meaningful conversations about what's on people's minds, right? So I think that as many opportunities as we can to ask those basic questions in a group setting, 10, 20, 30 young people in a row, about what's a good day, what's a bad day, what's on your mind, et cetera. Getting those feelings out, seeing that there are other people who share those concerns, I think would begin to elevate some of these issues and potentially even address, you know, I think what Dee talked about is understanding how these things can be approached from a local level as well, just not in Washington, D.C. So I think the more people we can have those conversations with our kids, it's at least a first step, in my opinion.
Thank you, John. And you else want to go? Thoughts?
I'm going to say the same thing about listening, but I'm going to actually use exactly what you just said, John, with my kids from Homefront every week now. I'm going to ask those specific questions and see if that promotes a little bit more conversation. I mean, they're already pretty free in what they talk about, but I'm going to give it a shot. So thank you for offering that.
Yeah, I think a lot of it boils down to having brave space and safe space, and how do we help people, young people, even the people supporting young people, have community where there are outlets of expression, so that people aren't holding these experiences and letting them build, but also where there's community that's being built, where there's activity that perhaps can thwart harmful behavior, whether that's harmful to self or harmful to others. So I think redefining, what a brave, beloved community looks like in this type of context is something that we all would benefit from.
Yeah, thank you, Dee. Would
Well,
you like
first
the
of all,
last word?
I just want to shout out to my friend Iran Azario, who's on the call tonight, who is an incredible advocate for peace and change, and works with young people in urban communities here in Connecticut. And in the chat, he talked about how, there's such trauma and there's such an effect on the brain, and there's depression and there's anger, and often a disconnect with the people in the community who really, I think, do want to give support. So how do you connect those pieces and really help the kids grow to become voters when they feel so disconnected and so like they're not going to listen to me anyway? So, and I don't really have the answer except for what these amazing people on the panel are talking about, which is listening and art, and probably all the programs around that you provide for young people. I see it on social media all the time, and the love and outpour. And I think there are candidates. We're seeing some amazing candidates, young people who are defying like the old white man stereotype or reality that we know as like an elected official. And so hopefully that will continue to change. I just saw Beto dancing on TikTok yesterday. So I do think there's hope for further connection there, that that Gen Z is forging this path, because not only are they saying, we're angry, this is not okay, but I'm going to get out there and vote as soon as I turn 18, because I know that I can be part of the change.
Absolutely. Well, this was amazing. Thank you all so much. John, Dee, Barbara, and Abby, thank you so much for being part of this powerful discussion. We hope our audience here tonight has gained some new insights and tools for taking action against gun violence in their own communities. Just a reminder, you can order the books that our authors have written from IndiesUnite. It's going to be in the link in the chat box. There'll also be a window that pops up after the event that'll take you to a link to order the books as well. And last but not least, many, many thanks to the hardworking and passionate IndiesUnite team, including Boogie Down Books, Little Shop of Stories, Monkey See, Monkey Do, Politics and Prose, River Dog Book Company, and Second Star to the Right. We couldn't have put this on without all of you. And to our panel, I can't thank you enough. Thank you for all your words of wisdom and for being such a light for us tonight. So thank you very much.
Thank you for including us.
Absolutely. Thank you.